Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Emma Gillespie.
US President Donald Trump has met with both Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in his latest attempt to reach a peace deal in Ukraine. The meetings come after 3.5 years of war with no major breakthrough. Trump discussed ending the conflict with both leaders separately, though no concrete deal was reached. Today, we are breaking down what happened in these high-stakes diplomatic meetings and what comes next in efforts to end the war in Ukraine.
Billi, as you said in your intro, this conflict has now been running for 3.5 years. It feels like things have really escalated, though. Since Donald Trump was re-elected, he has pushed a lot. He has pushed really heavily to broker a ceasefire deal in Ukraine. But let's start with the context. Let's take it back to 2022. What do we need to know?
Yeah, so it was in Feb 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. And so, like you said, it's been nearly 3.5 years, nearly 4 years since this conflict began. Now, in terms of the impact this has had, in terms of the civilian impact, neither country actually publishes official death tolls. But the United Nations has estimated that at least 13,800 civilians have been killed in Ukraine since the war broke out. We also know that more than 5.6 million people have fled Ukraine since Russia first invaded. That's also according to UN data.
Wow, I didn't realize that figure was so high, 5.6 million.
Yeah, and I remember when it first happened, the images and the videos of, the roads being blocked out with cars trying to flee the country. It was quite stark imagery. Now, the death toll of troops is much larger. The latest estimates from June this year is that nearly 1 million Russian troops have been killed or wounded, and about 400,000 Ukrainian troops have also been killed or injured. That is a huge impact on the troops.
Yeah.
And those estimates are from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Again, those are just estimates because we don't know the official toll.
Right. Can you remind us why Russia invaded Ukraine in the first place? I'm sure it is an extremely complicated answer, but how would you explain it?
Yeah, I think it's also important context because it kind of explains why the US is now involved in the talks. So, like you said, it's obviously complicated. There is a lot of history there. Ukraine is one of several countries in Eastern Europe that was part of the Soviet Union before it collapsed in the 1990s. So I think that just gives you some context. Also because since then, there have been territorial disputes between Russia and Ukraine. Now, when Putin declared what he called Russia's special military operation, that's what he called it in 2022 in Ukraine, he spoke a lot about guaranteeing Russia's security. So this is basically about Russia saying that they feel like they are under threat from specifically Western forces. And a big part of this all centers around Russia's concerns about the growing power of NATO, which stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
We hear a lot about NATO, especially in the context of this conflict.
Yes.
What is it, though?
Yes, good question, a fundamental question. So NATO is a military alliance of 32 European and Northern American countries. Now that figure of 32 has grown in recent decades, so it wasn't always that large. And a key part of it is that their founding treaty states an attack against one ally is considered as an attack against all allies. And that is probably the most important feature of the NATO alliance because it binds members to go to war on each other's behalf. So essentially, if there is an attack on one NATO country, then that alliance sees it as an attack on all NATO countries and will go in to defend for that country that has been under attack. And like I said, it has expanded. That number of 32 allies has expanded since it first began, and it now includes several countries in Eastern Europe which are closer geographically to Russia. And Russia is, of course, not part of NATO.
Yeah, we have seen some European countries, even the likes of Switzerland, joining NATO. Switzerland are famously kind of apolitical neutral
Yes.
zone. Yeah. Shoring up their defenses and security pacts because of the threat of Russia, given its ongoing conflict in Ukraine.
Exactly. And so to bring this back to Ukraine, Ukraine does want to be part of NATO, but is not. And Russia sees Ukraine becoming part of NATO as a threat because it would mean that most of its neighboring countries are all part of this military alliance.
Yeah.
So one of Putin's key demands when it comes to this peace deal that we're talking about is a guarantee that Ukraine never joins NATO.
Okay, got it. And so NATO, just to recap, it's this military alliance between European countries and the US. Obviously, the US is one of the biggest forces in NATO. Is that why it's so involved in these peace talks?
Yeah, exactly. And it was also something that US President Donald Trump campaigned on before the election last year. He famously said that he would be able to broker a peace deal within 24 hours of becoming president. Now, obviously, that hasn't happened, but Trump has now met with both Putin and Zelenskyy as he continues his attempt at trying to reach a peace deal.
Yeah, I think it's really important to highlight how he campaigned on this issue because Joe Biden, as the former president of the US, certainly showed really strong support for Ukraine. He had regular meetings with Zelenskyy. He was promoting regular funding to support Ukraine, but he didn't seem to have this kind of hardline stance on intervening to force an end to this war. But Trump really campaigned for election on this idea that he is a master negotiator, that he can bring global powers to the table to resolve these kinds of conflicts, not just in Ukraine, but all over the world.
Yeah.
So the Putin-Trump meeting came first.
Yes.
What do we need to know about that one?
Hi, I'm Ola.
And I'm Elliot.
We're the two-person team behind everything video and audio here at the Daily Aus.
If you want to help us grow so we can deliver more of the content that you love, be sure to hit subscribe.
Now let's get back to the video.
Yeah, so this was on Saturday morning Australia time. We woke up to it on Saturday. And yeah, it was the pair's first meeting since Trump had returned to the White House. So Putin and Trump's first meeting since Donald Trump had become president for the second time. In terms of what came out of it, essentially not a lot. There was no agreement to end the war in Ukraine. After the meeting, Trump told reporters, "We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there."
And just to clarify, there was no representatives from Ukraine in that meeting.
No, but then what Trump said is that he was meeting with Zelenskyy in the coming days, which we will get to because that has now happened. He did say that there were some agreements from that meeting with Putin, but they didn't specify exactly what those agreements were. Here's a little bit more of that press conference, which was held alongside Putin.
I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal.
Now, after those statements were read out, they actually didn't answer any questions from journalists that were at that press conference. That is quite unusual for Trump when he is meeting with other world leaders. Usually they have done those press conferences in the Oval Office.
Yep.
But this was clearly very different and it was a lot more orchestrated, I would say. I thought this line explained the result of the meeting well from the New York Times. They reported, "It would be hard to imagine an event that could have gone better from the point of view of the Russian leader, who made no public commitment to stop his assault on Ukraine and yet was treated as a valued friend."
Very interesting. And I
Yeah.
suppose that's been the criticism of a lot of Donald Trump's handling of this conflict, is that he's treating perhaps Putin and Zelenskyy as equals in this conversation, whereas the broader global community view is that Russia has invaded Ukraine, Ukraine needs the world's support, and we shouldn't be pandering to Putin.
Yeah, and I think that's important to point out that there has been criticism of this meeting. One Democrat politician, Senator Chris Murphy, Murphy, said the photo op in and of itself essentially legitimizes war crimes, telegraphs to evil men around the world that they can get away with murdering civilians and still get a photo op with the President of the United States.
Wow.
So that is the perspective of a politician, obviously on the opposing side of politics as Trump. But yeah, important to point out that there has been criticism.
So some very strong language. That meeting in Alaska between Trump and Putin was Saturday morning for us here in Australia. And then on Tuesday morning, we woke up to the meeting of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Trump having wrapped up. It's not the first time that they've met in recent months, though, is it? There is a particular viral moment that stands out.
Yeah, so Trump hosted Zelenskyy literally in his first month of being in office. That was earlier this year in Feb. And yeah, it was quite a frosty meeting. Just to remind us of exactly what happened, here's a snippet of an exchange between Vice President J.D. Vance, Trump, and Zelenskyy back in Feb this year.
Have you said thank you once?
A lot of times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank you?
Even today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country
Can
is
I-
in big
can-
trouble.
can I
Wait a
answer?
minute. No.
Can
You've
I
done a lot
answer?
of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not
I
winning.
know.
You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of
we are
coming out
staying,
okay because of
Mr.
us.
President.
Okay, so things were frosty to say the least. Tensions were high. It didn't really seem like in that moment, just a few months later, we'd be talking about another Zelenskyy-Trump meeting in the Oval Office. So how did the latest one go?
This one had a very different dynamic. There were none of those really tense exchanges. I think the tone of it was quite civil, to be honest. Probably the biggest thing that came from the meeting was the news that there could now be a meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy, as well as Trump. So Trump said via social media after, at the conclusion of the meetings, I called President Putin and began the arrangements for a meeting at a location to be determined between President Putin and President Zelenskyy.
So a meeting of Putin and Zelenskyy feels like a pretty big deal. What will be the key points of those negotiations? How would this even work?
Yeah, I don't want to simplify this too much, but, you know, for the purposes of a 10-minute podcast, we often have to. A lot of this is about territory. It all comes down to territory. And the key questions of what is Russian territory and what is Ukrainian territory. And one of the key questions that needs to be answered is, would Ukraine be willing to give up some territory in the pursuit of peace? Or will they stand their ground and try to come to a peace agreement another way? But again, another question is that even possible?
Yeah, and this is a sticking point really for Zelenskyy that we've heard over and over the last 3.5 years or so, is that Ukraine is not going to cede its territory to Russia.
Exactly.
And Trump kind of, I suppose, nudging Zelenskyy to be a bit more compromising.
Yeah, I think Trump is saying that both of you are going to need to make compromises here. Another key part of this is NATO. So to bring it back to what we were talking about before, Putin wants a guarantee that Ukraine will not join NATO. And I think it's also important to point out that before Trump's meeting with Zelenskyy, Trump posted to social media saying no going into NATO by Ukraine. So I shared the context of that before, but Zelenskyy has wanted help from NATO troops in Ukraine, which Russia has responded to in a very strong way. Even on Monday, Russia's foreign ministry said, we reaffirm our repeatedly stated position of categorical rejection of any scenarios involving the presence of a military contingent from NATO countries in Ukraine.
Billi, how likely is a face-to-face meeting between Putin and Zelenskyy?
Well, the leaders haven't actually spoken in person since before Russia invaded Ukraine. Their last formal meeting was in 2019 when Zelenskyy and Putin met in Paris. And the aim of those talks was to try and de-escalate tensions between Ukrainian forces and pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. Now, that was the beginning of a series of negotiations between officials from the two countries, but evidently they broke down when Russia launched its invasion in 2022. So we really don't have much to go by in terms of the history of their relationship and how negotiations between them go, except for clearly very badly, given the situation that we are in. If they do end up getting together in person under Trump's plan, it will be a very historic moment regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, fascinating. And of course, we will keep an eye on that and bring you all the latest updates over on the Daily Aus Instagram feed as we learn more about this developing story. Billi, thank you so much for explaining it to us.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to today's episode. We will be back later on this afternoon with your evening news headlines. But until then, have a great day.